Hey, what's up, y'all? It's your boy Preston here, and this is actually my first reaction video, and shit like that. Cause overall, like I knew that, that I had to get, to the Holloway and Poirier 3 fight, and shit like that, and I didn't get into that fight, I didn't even do my prediction for the fight. All around, I mean, obviously, I went for Holloway. Even though Dustin Poirier, was 2-0 against Holloway, but it's just more of the like that was back in the day. You know what I'm saying? Like Holloway is a different fighter from what he was back in the day. Like Holloway has always been good, and shit like that. But once Holloway hit that champion status, that's when it's just like he just differentiated himself from Dustin Poirier, because he was actually a champion and kept that belt for a very long time. Dustin Poirier, and stuff like that, he was the interim champion. I think he held that for a little bit too, you know, but his dynasty wasn't like, his dynasty when it comes down to that wasn't like Holloway's. But at the same time, his dynasty all around when it comes down to being a fighter, yes. Because we know that both these fighters stylistically is a tough match, and shit like that, but it just Max has changed a lot, and shit like that and shit like that. It's just he knows how to win, and shit like that, regardless of what it is and shit like that, Max Holloway, he knows how to win, and shit like that, and that's the thing and shit like that. Like he knows how to win, Max Holloway, and shit like that, and that's the thing and shit like that, and and basically, and shit like that, like Dustin Poirier, he's kind of like, like he's been struggling a little bit for a little bit, and stuff like not struggling, but it's just more of like, it's just like, like he's proven that he's a good fighter, but it's just more of like him fighting. Hold up, hold up, guys and girls. Alrighty. There we go. Top editor type shit. There we go. It's way more brighter so I can see myself in the screen, and stuff like that, But yeah, and stuff like that, But I seen this fight, and stuff like that. I'm just gonna get that out the way, and shit like that, I did see this fight, but I mean, at the other hand, I do have this, I think it's like a gram, shisher right here, and shit like that, We got a gram of a shisher right here, and shit like that, So it's gonna be a bit of a party, and shit like that, you know what I'm saying? And that's the thing and shit like that, And, yeah, man, and shit like that. This video right here is a 7-minute and 13-second video, and stuff like that, So, yeah, man, this is gonna be a, yeah, and shit like that. It's just gonna be a little bit of highlights, and shit like that, But I wonder, I think I'm gonna just put this right here, because I need to grab a chair, y'all. Alrighty. Back in action. That's actually very good. It's like it's like a little bit of a shadow. Let me see if I can remove. There we go. Spare that out the way. Yep. There we go. But yeah, man, and shit like that. This is a 7-minute and 13-second video. This is the trilogy of the fight, and shit like that, And yeah, and I'm pretty sure most of you guys know what happened, with the fight, and shit like that, But, I think I actually already said it. Actually, I think I've already said it. But Max Holloway, he won by a unanimous decision. I mean, Poirier was lucky he didn't get knocked out in this fight, and shit like that, I'm just saying, like, he got real lucky that he didn't get knocked out in this fight, you know, and I'm just saying, you know, and shit like that, you know, and yeah, you know, and shit like that, you know. But yeah, man, you know, and shit like that, you know, we're gonna get into the fight right now. We're gonna turn this up a little bit, all right? Here we go.
Come out ready to fight. Goosebumps. Dustin Poirier shut behind him for the final time. And the belt is on the line. First meeting between these two was 2012. They should not fully put Max down, but he hurt him. That check right hand that he throws. He's a right-handed guy, but he fights south.
And overall, I'm new at this, you know, so YouTube, please cut me some slack, you know, and shit like that. I'm really new at this. You know, I'm trying to have different ways of where I can, you know, you know, react to this and shit like that, you know. Like, it's just like, I'm just saying, you know, it's just like, I'm trying to, you know, figure my way out to knowing what I need to do, you know, and shit like that. Because I'm not trying to get copyrighted on nothing, you know, and shit like that. Because it just... is definitely, you know, a bust whenever, you know, you get copyrighted, you know, and stuff like that, you know. But I need to clear some storage soon on this, though, but yeah.
Good inside leg. Max needs to find his rhythm like made of Holloway's knockout of Gaethje, rightfully so. Against one of the most dangerous guys in the division. Fight for the BMF. Dustin. Oh, Holloway trying to follow up with the right hand. He covers up, gets back. Big time early moments for the champ. That right hand's always ready. That was not there for Holloway as Max has gotten older. But he did not have.
Like, genuinely, like, I thought he was done right there, you know, and shit like that, you know, because Max Holloway, he, like, you know, because it's like Max Holloway, when he puts you to the ground like that, you know, it's just like, he knows how to stop you, you know, and shit like that, you know, it's like, you know, it's just, he's really good at stopping people, you know, I mean, like, it's just like, it was proven against Justin Gaethje, you know, and shit like that, you know, he could stop you any moment of the fight, you know, it doesn't really matter, but, oh, there it is. You know, it doesn't really matter, you know, and shit like that. You know what I'm saying? And that's the thing and shit like, oh. Had some tools in my pocket, you know, and shit like that. Because I'm trying to get my quad. I'm still in the progress of getting my quad fixed. You know, like, I'm actually in the progress of having that video, of that video too. You know, and shit like that, you know. Pretty sure I said that, you know, and stuff like that, you know. But yeah, you know, but like, but I'm just saying, though, the volume of Max is really good, though. But also, it's just like...
That pop! He has now. Played with a low leg kick. When I asked him earlier in the week, what was the most dangerous? The fact that Dustin fights with his power hand in front. And Dustin will work his way into switching toward the... And then slide right into that Holloway. At the end of round one, that broke Justin's nose. After I broke his nose, that spinning back kick dips. Hard. And Holloway used so much in it. Right now, Max has started much better. His hands up fast, but very good start for Holloway. I mean, good quality feints. Little slap left hand, right hand down the middle. That drop, bink, put it right down the middle. At the beginning of round two. And you saw Max use that slap left hand. And he's not throwing everything hard, right? He's kind of throws that left hand with different timing. Oh, right hand. That's a good start to it. Here early in round two.
I'm just saying, bro, you know, and shit like that, you know, it's like, I'm not gonna lie, though, you know, and shit like that, you know, it's like, you know, Holloway might need to fight for another title, like, I think, is he the, oh, well, I mean, he's the BMF champ, but, like, I think that, Ilia Poirier is the champion in that division. He already got squashed by Ilia Poirier, you know, and shit like that, you know. So it's like, yeah, you know, and shit like that, you know. Like, I feel like, he could fight for the interim, and shit like that, because I feel like, he really, because Max is Max, like, there's nobody who's gonna really beat Max unless if you're really like that, like, unless if you were Alexander Volkanovski, or now if you're Ilya Poirier, like, you have to be well-rounded, and shit like that, and be really, really fucking good at being well-rounded, and shit like that, you know what I'm saying, like Alexander Volkanovski, and shit like that, like, he was that dude, man. I mean, he was that, he still is that dude, and shit like that, but it's just more of like, he had that elite wrestling, and shit like that elite ground and pound, and shit like that, but then also, he also had really good hands. He also had really good striking too, because he was out striking Holloway, and shit like that. So it's just like, if you're well-rounded in different things and shit like that, with your hands, like realistically, not just with your hands, it gotta be with, like, wrestling, something else that's not just with striking, you know what I mean, and shit like that, because, like, I'm just saying, and shit like that, because it's like, Holloway's that dude, man, and shit like that. He's that dude, man. It's like, Poirier's still a good fighter, and shit like that. I mean, he's a bit more older, I mean, they're both around the same age. I mean, the Holloway's 33. I looked because I remember the last time I was curious, and I looked. Holloway is 33. Dustin Poirier is 36, or 37, or one of the two, and shit like that. I know damn well between one of the two. If I'm gonna lean more towards something, I think it's at 36. I think he is, Dustin Poirier, and shit like that, so. That's the thing, and shit like that, you know what I'm saying? And yeah, bro, shit like that, like, and yeah, but let me play this.
Mounted now. He's in a lot of trouble, Poirier. Holloway's combination punching is so good. There's a thud on those punches now. First 3.5 minutes. Holloway sneaks that leg out. Pressure coming. 1 minute to go, round 2. Back and forth. I remember in their second fight, he got in trouble. I like the follow-up with the knee that Poirier's been landing. Remaining composed as he eats an elbow. We got a fight. Both guys hurt bad in that round. Right here, Max. Dustin at the end of the round. Straight left hand. Then he jumps the guillotine. Could you imagine? Max wobbly getting back to the stool, too. Don't go straight back. Round 3 of a possible fight. Max, they told him do not go straight back. Extent to which Holloway can recover right. Nice left hand. The right hand of Dustin Poirier. As he was trying to avoid, he hit him with his forearm on the head there. Earlier, he was throwing that. Really nice jab by Poirier a moment ago. And now he'd be elevated by the
pause. Respect to local combat heroes. If you guys please go subscribe to local combat heroes, and shit like that, Pretty sure he'll post some highlights and shit like that. But I just shout out to you, bro. And shit like that,
2 minutes, round 3. Max is Dustin's got to get back behind that jab.
Ooh, that was a nice
right, Poirier holding his ground. Dustin's got to get back behind that jab. Right, Poirier holding his ground. Holloway on the numbers here through 4 minutes around. Mouse and cut under the left eye. Recent eye scrape. Poirier drops down, lands. Knowledge by Poirier. I mean, who needs commentary? Really, anything. happened prior in UFC history. We got 2 rounds left in your career. Here they are.
He wants him to try to surprise Max Holloway. Sometimes just reset.
Right. And now we have the championship rounds as we get here, right?
But yeah, though, and shit like that, but I'm just saying, though, and shit like that, I wonder, like, who Max Holloway should fight, though, and shit like that. Like, to me, anything in the UFC could happen, but I really don't think, really anybody could, resist the the flurries of Max Holloway, and shit like that, you know what I'm saying? And, and that's the thing and shit like that, and yeah, and shit like that, like, I don't think anybody would be able to resist the flurries of Max Holloway, and shit like that, because because he can box you, and stuff like cut angles and shit like that, kickbox you, and shit like that, ground and pound you and shit like that, like, he all around is just a good striker, Max Holloway, and shit like that, like, I am not gonna lie, bro, and shit like that, respect to Max, respect to Dustin, too, he's also a good fighter, too. Because with Dustin Poirier, he's knocked a lot of niggas out, shit like that, literally, bro. Like, it's just, he's not those, like, he's been in this kind of stage before. But that's the thing, he's been in this kind of stage before.
When he gets within his range, though, he's got to let his hands go hard, because right now he's having trouble tracking Holloway.
Well, Max does such a good job of switching stances. Poirier's having a good start to round 4.
I just don't think that Poirier, I don't mean to pause it a lot, and shit like that, but, it's just, like, I don't, like, it's just more of, like, I just don't think that, that Dustin Poirier really, like, wanted to, like, win like that realistically, and shit like that, like, I don't really think he really wanted to win like that, and shit like that, and that's the thing and shit like that, because just, like, I think really, like, he was very serious on wanting to retire and shit like that, and because, Dustin Poirier, when it comes down to being on the feet, like, these are two of one of the most elite strikers in the UFC, dude, and shit like that, it's like, he could have had, like, he has all of the ability and shit like that, to be able to stop to stop somebody like Max Holloway, to stop anybody, or to beat anybody, you know what I mean, like, like, he shows, like, activity with his hands and accuracy with his hands, and shit like that, and overall, like, kind of like ring IQ, and shit like that, and shit like that, when it comes down to, striking, and shit like that, and that's what I'm just mean, like ring IQ, like, he overall had, like, really good ring IQ, and shit like that, and that's the thing, so he could have landed anything and shit like that, I just feel like, he was just obligated to take this one more paycheck from the UFC, and shit like that, and then, after that retire, and shit like that, like, it's just, I feel like he just was kind of just wanting to lose, and shit like that, realistically, because he really could have gave it to Holloway, if I, like, I really do feel like it, like, not saying he would have won, because, I mean, that would have just made Holloway more hungrier and shit like that, but I don't know, though, depending on what he's giving him, like, Holloway tends to sometimes, like, when he doesn't find his ways, he'll try to, like, move his feet and cut the angles and more focus on cutting the angles rather than striking sometimes and shit like that, that's when he's on his panic mode, so it's just, he could have done that, but that's the thing and shit like that, so I'm just saying, like, more of the story, this definitely would have been a lot more, a lot more competitive, and shit like that, if it, like, and shit like that, because, that's the thing and shit, but that it is what it is, you know what I mean?
Poirier's picking up the pace now.
Yeah, got caught standing right in front of Max.
him in the round one.
One thing with Dustin,
Only 2.5 to go, round 4. Shot from Max. Nice.
But there for Dustin in close. Oh, nice jab. And then, Holloway.
Yeah.
To the left hand, Max. Check right hook. Left.
Yeah,
Max is throwing more in combination.
141 significant strikes to Poirier's 85. And similar to the second fight that they had.
But Max hurt him twice, right? Max hurt him bad in round.
It seems as though tonight Holloway is closed back for Holloway. Late connection by Poirier.
He's throwing, just make sure you answer back.
Not built on, but
Well,
final round. Good man.
I believe that the forward pressure is final round of his entire career. Anticipates Poirier to continue to move forward.
I think we watched that. Maybe we could rewatch that as a team.
See Dustin Poirier just let his hands go like his corner ass. Try to get Max to make mistakes, but to do that, you got to keep throwing stuff at him.
Oh, big connection by Poirier up top.
By Holloway, he's been throwing it off by, nice right.
Poirier switching up the footwork, pressing forward. Good jab from Poirier. Poirier has devoted his entire life to his craft.
Poirier even acknowledged it, trying to get to Holloway.
No one's going to be wrong. Looked like an eye poke there. Oh, right hand got.
Dustin. And so key to, been so key to Holloway tonight.
Right hand got.
Dustin. And so key to,
They're smacking each other.
been so key to Holloway tonight. Holloway did what his coaches asked. Look at that.
I can't wait for the last 10 seconds. 10.
Man, this shit is crazy.
And they forever linked. They need the full 25 minutes yet again
Wow.
in competing for the BMF championship. And Dustin Poirier.
For like 10 seconds he was smacking on Poirier, and shit like that, But,
in victory or defeat, valiant in his final fight as a mixed martial arts pro in a career that dates all the way back to 2009.
Singer Selena Gomez said she threw away her favorite clothes after drinking this Himalaya salt mixture because they were too baggy. Today I'm going to show you...
But yeah, man, I hope y'all, enjoyed that, and shit like that, But yeah, man, and shit like that, Dustin Poirier, he had a great career, and shit like that, like, I definitely wish I watched a lot more of your fights, and shit like that, because you're a hell of a fighter, man, and shit like that, so I'm just saying, and shit like that. I know, like this isn't gonna be, like, showcased on anything or anything like that, but I'm just saying, like, Dustin Poirier, you are a great fighter, bro. And, your legacy is going to be remembered. For sure. But, and that's the thing and shit like that, and yeah, man, and shit like that, but, basically, like, with Max Holloway and shit like that, like, let's see who he can fight, though. Let's see. The next fighter that I think that Max Holloway should fight is Patty the Batty Piblet. It only makes sense, and shit like that, in my opinion. I mean, any fight could happen, but it's just more of, like, overall, like, it's just, like, that's the fight that more makes sense and shit like that, because they don't really go by, like, mandatories or anything like that, they just more throw in whoever, like, they want to throw in there to fight, and shit like that with the UFC. And basically, and Patty Piblet, he's like ranked, Let me look, actually. So, Paddy Pimblett, he's, like, ranked in the top 10, you know, and shit like that. He's ranked number 9, you know, and stuff like that, you know. Let me see, hold up. Max Holloway, he's ranked number 4, so it would be number 4 versus number 9. That's a pretty good matchup, in my opinion, you know, and shit like that, you know. And, you know, Paddy Pimblett, you know, he's been on the good run. What was his last win? Michael Chandler. That was a good win against Michael Chandler, bro. You know, shit like that. Like, I'm not gonna lie, bro. That was a good win against Michael Chandler. Because I ain't gonna lie, I did not think Paddy Pimblett was gonna beat Michael Chandler. You know, shit like that. You know, like, the odds were in favor of Paddy Pimblett. But I just thought that, like, people just, like, you know, like, they just wanted, you know, Michael Chandler to win, so they just wanted to bet against him or whatever it is. You know, I did, like, some odd shit like that, you know what I mean? But it's just more of, like, you know, but it's just more of at the same time, though, and shit like that, you know, like, you know, it's just more of at the same time, you know, and shit like that, you know, I could see why they picked Paddy Pimblett, you know, and shit like that, you know, in that fight against Michael Chandler. That's the thing, you know, and shit like that, you know. So, this fight makes sense, you know, and shit like that, you know, because it'd be... With Paddy Pimblett, you could really toss him in there with anybody, realistically. You know, and shit like that. You know, like, you could really toss him in there with anybody. You know, and shit like that. Like, it doesn't matter. You know, and shit like that. You know, he'll still perform, you know, at what he's gonna perform, you know, and shit like that. Like, and plus, like, you know, there's a lot of fighters that he hasn't fought yet, you know. Like, I don't think he's fought Beneil Dariush. I don't think he's fought, you know, Mateusz Gamrot, you know. I don't think he's fought in... Arman Sarukian, like, he hasn't fought in all those guys, you know, and shit like that, you know, but, like, you know, but I'm just saying, you know, and shit, so, there could be all those fights for that, but I'm just saying, like, if there's somebody available for, you know, Paddy Pimblett, you know, and I mean, if there's somebody available, I mean, for Max Holloway, I honestly, like, because I would definitely watch that fight, and it would be the main event, I already know, you know, and shit like that, you know, because that would be a good fight, too, because, you know, because Paddy Pimblett, he's a tough motherfucker, but he also has a big mouth. Well, I wouldn't say he has a big mouth, you know, and shit like that, like... I don't know if he has a big mouth and shit like that, you know what I'm saying? Because he's a really humble guy, you know, he seems like a very genuine, nice dude, you know, and shit like that, you know, like, but I at the same time, though, and shit like that, you know, it's just like, you know, he still is a fighter where it's just like, you know, where, you know, he's gonna be arrogant, like, where he's kind of like, you know, like, arrogant a little bit, you know, and shit like that, but arrogant and not arrogant, you know, and shit like that, you know, like, his arrogance isn't annoying, though, you know what I mean, like, he is an annoying Paddy Pimblett, like, I could tolerate Paddy Pimblett, you know, and shit like that, you know, like, you know, he's the type where, like, you know, where it's like, I could tolerate his type of personality, you know, and shit like that, you know, but yeah, you know, and shit like that, you know. And that's the thing, bro. You know, and shit like that, you know, because, for real, bro, you know, and shit. But yeah, you know, and shit like that, you know, but yeah, you know, and stuff like that, you know. But if I would say who would win that fight between Max Holloway and, you know, what's his name and shit like that, and Paddy Pimblett, you know who I think would win between Max Holloway and Paddy Pimblett? I would probably say, like, even though, like, it would be a tough fight, you know, and shit like that, you know, but it's just more of, like, if he could bring down Max Holloway, I mean, yeah, you never know, because, I mean, like his ground game is a little questionable, and he could really make an upset and expose that, you know, and shit like that, you know what I'm saying? If that's the thing and shit like that, you know, but, you know, because he has quick jiu-jitsu, You know, he has really, really good jiu-jitsu, you know, and shit like that. You know, like, he literally got Brazilian, like, he's like Brazilian with that jiu-jitsu. Like, I mean, it's Brazilian jiu-jitsu, but he's like Brazilian with that jiu-jitsu, you know, and shit like that, you know, like, literally, like, I'm just saying, like, you know, like, he fights like he fights like a Brazilian, you know what I mean? But yeah, you know, and shit like that, you know, but I don't know, you know, shit like that. I'm gonna just go round for round. I would say the first round, I'm gonna give it to Max Holloway. I'm gonna say the second round, you know, and so, because they both haven't fought each other, you know what I mean? You know, so it's gonna be kind of feeling each other out. Second round, I'm gonna give that to Max Holloway, you know, and shit like that, you know, and shit, you know, it's gonna be around the same as the first round. The third round, I would say that I would give it to. I would probably say that, you know, because I don't know if you can do ties in the round, you know, in the UFC, but, you know, if I would give it to somebody, you know, and shit like that, you know, I probably would think Paddy Pimblett off of just, actually, no, I would say Max Holloway, and then, overall, I think Max Holloway should be able to take that win, you know, and shit like that against Paddy Pimblett, you know, and stuff like that. You know, it would be a tough fight, you know, and stuff like that, you know, where Max would have to, you know, fight through, you know, through adversity and shit like that against, you know, against Paddy Pimblett, you know, and shit like that, you know, but he'll still be able to win rounds and get the job done round for round and win those rounds and shit like that, you know, and win those rounds and stuff like that, you know, and, you know, win those rounds and win the fight, you know, and shit like that, you know, and yeah, you know, and shit like that, you know, so overall, I would say Max Holloway would win that fight, you know, and shit like that by a decision, you know, and shit like that. If there was a rematch, now that's a different story and shit like that. Like, if there was a rematch between Max and Paddy Pimblett, you know, and shit like that, you know, I would probably say that, like, you know, you know, I think Paddy Pimblett all day, you know, and shit like that, you know, like, would just try to, like, you know, look for the grapple, you know, and shit like that, you know, like, he would just try to look for the grapple, you know, and shit like that, you know, and, you know, and that's the thing. But either way, I'm pretty sure Max would still win the rematch, you know, and shit like that, you know, and shit. But it would just be a little bit more competitive, you know, and shit like that if they had a rematch, you know, and shit like that, you know. But yeah, man, you know, and shit like that, you know. But you know, but for all y'all, you know, and shit like that, you know, that's you know, that's, you know, been, you know, here, you know, and shit like that. Thank y'all, you know, and shit like that. And I love y'all, you know. And I just want you to know that, y'all, that I appreciate y'all, you know, and shit like that, you know, because, you know, sometimes and shit like that, you know, it's like, you know, with YouTubing and shit like that, you know, it's like, you know, you don't feel, you know, as, you know, you don't feel, you know, like respected and shit like that, you know what I mean? You know, and shit like that, you know, but, you know, you're respected, you know, and shit like that over here, you know, and you're loved over here, you know, and stuff like that, you know, and, yeah, you know, and stuff like that, you know, but yeah, you know, and stuff like that, I'm just saying, you know, and shit like that, you know, but, just wanted to say that to y'all, you know, and shit like that, you know, and, that's the thing and shit like that, you know, and yeah, you know, and stuff, you know, but, basically and shit, you know, that is it for the video and shit like that, you know, make sure you guys like and subscribe. I'm Preston. Peace out, y'all.